All right, so it seems like inflation is just going to continue being one of these issues that we have to keep checking in on to basically debunk a lot of the bullshit narratives that there have been surrounding why inflation is primarily being driven within different sectors of the economy. And I got a pretty good breakdown here for you guys in terms of specifically the meatpacking industry. And this is basically explaining why you guys, if you go to the grocery store and you're buying chicken or beef or pork or any other types of meats, why we have seen a massive increase in the price. And it doesn't have a lot to do with the cattle farmers and the people who are actually doing a lot of the work to raise the beef or raise the poultry. It actually has a lot more to do with the monopolization that exists within the meat packing industry. And Joe Biden, surprisingly enough, is actually doing something to try to push back at least a little bit on the monopolistic power that a lot of these companies have. Now, we're going to get into why, as usual, what Joe Biden is doing here doesn't go nearly far enough or doesn't utilize all of the tools that he has at his disposal to be able to do something about this, but he is doing something. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details in terms of Biden's plan to challenge the monopoly power within the meatpacking industry. This gives us a good glimpse in terms of how far he is willing to go to challenge monopoly power. So here from USA Today, they say that Biden unveils a $1 billion plan to increase meatpacking competition amid high inflation. So this story is basically one that we have seen over the entirety of the US economy. It is the capitalist mode of production. It is for-profit corporations using the narrative of inflation in order to artificially drive up their prices, also relying on the fact that, again, they have largely monopolistic control over these industries. So they say that the price of groceries has climbed 6.4% over the previous 12 months, according to the November data, and that includes a 12.8% spike in the price of meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. And they say that 4 large meatpacking companies control 85% of beef processing, and 4 firms control 54% of poultry processing, and about 70% of pork processing, according to the White House. So you see here, it's pretty obvious, okay? If you have 4 corporations that are somewhat working in tandem to drive up those prices, then, you don't have any real competition if they control 85% of the processing, okay? And this goes for all 3 of these different sectors. Obviously, beef seems to be the worst one, with 4 companies controlling over 85% of the processing. So again, just complete monopolistic control with these companies that get to jack up the prices. But here's basically what Biden had to say. Now, the rhetoric that Biden uses in this, I give him full credit on, because the rhetoric that he's using it's pretty good, okay? You got to give him a 7.5 out of 10, but on the actual substance of what he's doing about this, he does fall pretty short. So let's go ahead and check in with what type of rhetoric that Biden is using. So he says that as their profits go up, the prices that you see in the grocery stores go up commensurate, Biden said, and the prices that farmers receive for the products that they are bringing to the market go down, and this reflects the market being distorted by a lack of competition. And basically what he's trying to point out there, and we're going to get to some more rhetoric here, but basically what he's pointing out is that there are 3 main players within this entire equation. You have the actual farmers, the cattle ranchers who are raising the beef and raising the cattle, that they then take that beef and they sell it to these meat processing and meat packing facilities, who are the second player, who then process this meat, put it into nice packaging and ship it off to the grocery stores, which are the third player that then sell the beef to you. So among those 3 different players, basically, it seems like the middlemen, the meat packing people, are the ones that are largely at fault for the rise in prices. And again, we're talking about an industry that is largely monopolized amongst 4 companies, basically. But Biden and the White House continued with the rhetoric on this, saying that the White House also said that it will strengthen the product labeling rules, work to increase transparency in cattle markets so that ranchers can get a fair price for their work, and bolster worker protections. So again, that all sounds pretty good. And specifically what they're talking about in terms of the labeling that they're talking about, or increasing the transparency on the product labeling, is basically when you go to the grocery store and something says American-made beef or American-grown beef, basically, it's not actually true that that is necessarily, cattle that was raised within the United States, because they can use these stupid loopholes that exist, which is what Biden is trying to address here, where, you could have cattle that was raised in Uruguay or some other random fucking country, and then these meat packing plants export that beef externally from the international markets, basically, and they bring it in, then they package it here in the United States, and then they say this is American grown beef, when it actually wasn't. You just packaged it here, right? So you see, again, how globalization, how the ability for a lot of these, gigantic international meat processing plants that they are able to rely on international markets and globalization to undercut American farmers, basically. But they continue here saying that, quote, right now, meat packers have an outsized power in setting the prices for beef, the White House noted on Monday, and the dominance of opaque contracts and insufficient competition undermine price discovery and fairness in the independent livestock markets, which ultimately locks producers into prices that aren't the product of free and fair negotiation. And they say that during his remarks on Monday's roundtable meeting, Biden echoed an agreement or an argument advanced by a number of progressive analysts and commentators in recent days that corporate concentration and greed are major culprits behind prices. And I'm probably going to get to an analysis either today or tomorrow that is actually pointing out that it is literally a majority of the inflation that we have seen within the U.S. economy is directly caused by corporate greed and corporations that are profitable right now, that are seeing record profits, and they just simply choose to use this narrative of inflation to arbitrarily jack up prices even more. So, this is something we're seeing across the entire economy, but we're just now specifically talking about the meat industry. But he continues saying, quote, that in too many industries, a handful of giant companies dominate the market, the president said, and too often they use their power to squeeze out smaller competitors and stifle new entrepreneurs, making our economy less dynamic and giving themselves free rein to raise prices, reduce options for consumers, and exploit workers. And he said the meat industry, he added, is a textbook example on the price side. So listen, this is pretty fucking based, okay? I don't really have much critique to add to this. Now, he did say some other pretty cringe and stupid things later down the line where, he said that capitalism is not when there's corporatism, and how monopoly is the antithesis to capitalism, and a bunch of other things that I could break down and disagree with. But, if you just take this at face value and you take what he just said there, railing against the monopolization that exists within the U.S. economy, that's all great on the rhetoric side. Now, what is he actually doing about it in terms of the substance of this billion-dollar promise? Well, let's get into some of the details on that. So, Biden's plan calls for providing financing, worker training, and technical assistance to independent companies, expanding meat processing capacity. So basically trying to support and lift from the ground up a lot of these smaller competitors to try to disrupt the monopolies that exist within, the four major producers. But Biden said that the Department of Agriculture is working to strengthen enforcement of the Packers and Stockyard Act of 1921, designed to protect farmers and cattle ranchers from deceptive or unfair practices in the meat markets. And the Agricultural Secretary, Tom Vilsack, which is an important name we're going to get to here in a second, said that the $1 billion includes $100 million to reduce the costs of inspections for small meat processing facilities and $800 million to provide grants and loans to address capacity and workforce issues, new technology, and facility expansion or construction. And the first $150 million will be made available this spring. So basically, to just condense all of that, it seems like what Biden is doing here is trying to give somewhat of subsidies and support to smaller meat processing and meat packing companies so that they can try to rise through the ranks and start to challenge the monopoly power that exists within this industry. Now, this doesn't go nearly far enough, and I'm going to explain to you guys exactly why here, but specifically on this guy, Tom Vilsack, okay, it is not surprising, or should not be surprising, that they are going with this, somewhat market intervention, but still, half-assed neoliberal approach to this because of this motherfucker, Tom Vilsack, who is leading the Department of Agriculture, and also happened to lead the Department of Agriculture under the Obama administration. So let's just go ahead and remind ourselves of exactly who this motherfucker is. So the fight over Joe Biden tapping Tom Vilsack as Agriculture Secretary explained. So there's a pretty good breakdown here from Vox in terms of why people had a problem with this guy being nominated in the first place. But here's a pretty good paragraph that basically gives a synopsis of it. They say, it's revealing then that his nomination, meaning Tom's nomination, has sparked immediate controversy and consternation among civil rights, animal, anti-monopoly, and family farm advocates who were disappointed in his prior tenure and with the fact that he spent the past 4 years working for big agriculture, earning nearly $1 million annual salary as the head of the U.S. Dairy Export Council, a dairy industry group. So again, okay, the guy who Biden nominated, just like with every other appointment within his cabinet, the guy who Biden nominated to lead the Department of Agriculture just had multiple years where he was sitting at the top of a company, basically making $1 million salary working for big agriculture. Okay, again, this would be like if you're, let's say Pentagon chief like Lloyd Austin, for example, just happened to, just get off sitting off the board of Raytheon Technologies right before he became the head of the Pentagon, which is actually exactly what happened. So again, you see the perverse, the revolving door basically that exists within these government appointments appointments and also the private sector. Okay, a lot of these motherfuckers, they go from these positions within the government, then they go for work for corporate America, then they go straight back to working for the government to employ policies basically that help their buddies that just gave them $1 million salaries basically. So I think this is basically just an indication of why Joe Biden's administration, why this guy Tom Vilsack wouldn't be going to this next step that I'm about to tell you guys. But again, basically the breakdown, it seems like, of what he's trying to do here is support smaller competition to basically try to disrupt this monopoly. Now, there's a pretty simple way that you could actually skip that step of trying to spend this, multi-years long process of trying to build up competitors. You could just straight up nationalize a lot of these motherfuckers, okay? And this goes for not just the meatpacking industry, but it goes for a lot of industries within other sectors of the economy. And there's a great breakdown here from Matt Brunegg that I read today that I'll leave down in the description below if you want to read the entire thing. But basically, he's asking the question of why not just nationalize Tyson Foods? Okay, you might recognize Tyson Foods. It's one of the biggest meatpacking plants in the entire country. I'm pretty sure this is the one where Tucker Carlson made a lot of his family money from. But he basically just asked the question again, why not just nationalize Tyson Foods? And it's pretty simple when he breaks it down here. He says, if there are 4 companies that control the meatpacking market and the government thinks that they are colluding in a way that generates super profits at the expense of adjacent market players, then the government should simply buy one of the 4 companies and run it properly. And he says, you don't need a years-long effort to maybe increase competition through subsidizing new firms. Simply nationalizing one of the big players would allow you to increase competition and bust up collusion in a few months. And he goes down to break down the math of all of this and how the government could take out, a $32 billion loan to buy the company and how it could, even in the long run be a profitable investment. But I think the lesson here is exactly what he was just saying, that no matter what the industry is, okay, if you have monopolization that exists within an industry, you got to break up the monopolies, all right? You can do your best, as Joe Biden, it seems like, is doing right here, in trying to promote smaller competitors to maybe one day, after years and years and years, be able to get their foot in the door and participate in this market that has been largely cornered by a tiny minority of these companies. But, no matter what the industry is, that's not going to be enough. And I've seen a couple good examples of analogies for this. This would be like, if you were trying to challenge the monopoly power of Google, and in doing so, you choose to subsidize basically like ask.com or bing.com. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, you can try to do that, but it's probably not going to work because Google still exists and still has the power that it is right now. And they could, potentially in the future just buy some of these companies that you're trying to promote right now. They could try to crush them and squeeze them out of the market, etc. So it seems like the easiest thing that could be done in this situation, and, obviously Joe Biden is not going to do this because he would be called a scary socialist, but, if we actually wanted to do something, right, if we had a Bernie Sanders in power, or even somebody who is to the left of Bernie Sanders, the real solution to something like this, the real solution to when you have a capitalist, hyper-capitalist monopolization within an economic sector is to go and have the government take control of even just one of those major 4 companies that have the monopolization over this industry. And if you just took control of one of them and then ran them properly to where you weren't price gouging, innocent American cattle farmers, then you could turn around, still be turning a profit, and you would have the government operating this system that isn't fucking over consumers and that isn't fucking over the cattle ranchers. And at the same time, you would force a lot of these other large meatpacking conglomerates to lower their prices back down because they would then be in competition with the government who is running it much more efficiently. So, that's what I think actually should be done in this situation. Obviously, Joe Biden is not going to do that. You got to give him a little bit of credit for taking a single step in the right direction. But as usual, with somebody like Joe Biden, with a neoliberal like Joe Biden, his approaches are never going to be the full extent of the power that he actually has at his disposal.